I'm Lee Nix, and this is A Memory of Malice. Hello, loves. You're probably wondering where I've been, and that's fair. I only intended to miss one episode, but that kind of blew up. Long story short, I injured my back, and I was resting to try and heal it. My back feels much better than it did, and I really want to get back to sharing cases with you. So here I am. Sorry for the radio silence. After my first failed update, I didn't want to accidentally lie to you guys again. Today's case centers on the mysterious disappearance of an 18-year-old girl and her family's determination to find her in the face of an ambivalent police department. This case has themes of racism towards Indigenous people. Jennifer Catcheway was born on June 19th, 1990. I think. I'm sure of her birthday, but less confident of her age. Most sources say that June 19th, 2008 was Jennifer Catcheway's 18th birthday, though. So math tells me she was born in 1990. There's not a lot of information available about Jennifer's childhood. I know she was a member of the Skowhenan First Nation, which is a Plains Ojibwe tribe. Her mother was Bernice Catcheway, a pastor, and her father was Wilfred Catcheway. She had 3 siblings, and I believe she was the youngest, but don't quote me on that. There's very little I could find about who Jennifer was as a person. It amazes me because there's a lot of media coverage on this case, but in all of that coverage, there's only a tiny bit of personal detail. Jennifer was fiercely loyal and family-oriented. Her mother described her as responsible, the kind of girl who would always tell you about her plans. She was a girl who was just on the cusp of beginning life, and she had a lot of potential. In June 2008, the same month in which Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper made a weak apology for the century-long abuse of Indigenous Canadians in residential schools, Jennifer Catcheway left a note in her parents' home. The note read, "Gone to see my cousin. Be back later. Love you. Put my ice cream in the fridge. I'll have it when I get back." From my research, I believe the cousin mentioned in the note is Sean Catcheway, but details on who Jennifer was with are very vague. What this note does is prove that Jennifer had every intention of returning home soon, both in her promise to be back later and to eat her ice cream. A few days later, June 19th rolled around. This was Jennifer's birthday, and there were plans for a celebratory family barbecue. Bernice received a call from her daughter that morning. During this call, Jennifer confirmed that she would be home for her party. She had called to remind her mother of it because she was so excited. She said she was getting a ride from 2 men. Now, I think these 2 men were her uncle, Charles Parenteau, and her cousin, Sean Catcheway, but take this with a grain of salt. The only source I found that mentions their names was an old article I tracked down on the Wayback Machine. Many articles mention that she was with her uncle and cousin, though. This call would later be traced to Grand Rapids, Manitoba, which is roughly 5 hours away from Jennifer's home in Portage la Prairie. So it would have taken her a good chunk of time to get back home in time for her birthday party. Which is probably why she was seen getting in a truck in Grand Rapids at approximately 12 p.m. Whoever was driving the truck said they dropped her off at Provincial Road 328 and PTH number 6 near Waterhen Junction. If you put this in Google Maps, you don't get a logical response. I think this intersection is Manitoba Highway 6 and Manitoba Highway 328, which shows up on the map as being a bit east of Waterhen. But I've never even been to Canada, let alone Manitoba, so I have no idea. Dropping someone off on the side of the highway is odd, no matter where the highway is. It's even worse when you realize that it's about 3 hours away from her destination. This is highly suspicious to me. But at this point in the story, Bernice and Wilfred Catcheway still don't know that anything is wrong with their daughter. That is, until Jennifer never shows up for her birthday barbecue. Naturally, her parents were worried, but they weren't frantic just yet. Bernice decided to give her daughter a couple of days. But when those days came and went with no sign of her daughter, she decided to report her missing. When Bernice contacted the Winnipeg Police Service, she didn't get the response that she deserved. When the constable found out how old Jennifer was, he told her mother to just wait it out, that she was probably on a drunk. This response is so infuriating. If this sounds familiar to you, it's the same thing that Amber Tuckerow's family heard when she went missing. It doesn't escape my notice that two young Indigenous women go missing, and the police resort to a tired stereotype to explain their disappearance rather than an investigation. If you are not aware, Indigenous people in the US and Canada have a history of being stereotyped as drunks. In the case of Indigenous peoples in the US, a study from the University of Arizona points out that Indigenous people are more likely to abstain from alcohol, while heavy drinking and binge drinking rates are nearly identical to those of white people. I'll have to admit ignorance on the issue in Canada. So it's quite enraging to hear that in both of these cases, mothers went to report their daughters missing, and the police responded by saying they were probably drunk somewhere. Enraging, but not surprising. According to Bernice Catcheway, it took another 5 days before the police took a missing persons report for Jennifer. Keep in mind that she waited a couple of days before reporting her daughter missing. Jennifer's been gone for about a week at this point. While waiting for the police to do their jobs, the Catcheways sprung into action. Bernice and Wilfred headed to the Dakota Teepee First Nation Reserve and began searching on July 3rd. This would be the first of many, many searches the pair would undertake. Why Dakota Teepee, you may ask? From my research, I believe that Jennifer's uncle, Charles, lived there. When the RCMP finally got off their asses, they took Sean Catcheway and Charles Parenteau in for questioning on July 4th. They also seized Charles Parenteau's truck for a full search. Connecting the dots between this and the Catcheway's search, I'm assuming these were the two men that Jennifer got a ride from that evening. They also questioned staff at the Northbrook Inn where Parenteau had been staying in Grand Rapids. Interestingly, he had a room booked there for June 19th and the 21st, but not for the 20th. Unfortunately, the RCMP released and cleared both men. Who knows why? The RCMP has released almost no information on this case. We just have to trust that there was a good reason for them to do so. Unfortunately, I have very little trust to go on in this case. On the 4th, while they were questioning the two men and examining the truck, police sealed a forest in a nearby small town called Gypsumville. There was some chatter amongst the residents that they had found a body, but this turned out to be false. The RCMP turned up nothing in this search. In their investigation, RCMP did turn up photos of Jennifer at a party in Grand Rapids. This, along with her call to her mother, confirms she was there. This is the last confirmed detail in this whole case. From this point on, the RCMP released no information. In most cases, this would be the end of the episode, but Bernice and Wilfred refused to give up on their daughter. For the next 15 years, to this very day, the pair have carried out their own investigation and exhaustive searches for Jennifer. I thought about writing this story in a timeline format, but from here on it would just be search, search, receive a tip, search, search, which is informative, but not very interesting. So I'll outline the basics and give you the important bits. The Catcheway search for Jennifer as often as possible. If it's warm enough to stick a shovel in the ground, they're out there looking for their daughter. So much that it has created tension in the family. In 2018, Bernice told the CBC, My daughter said, "Mom, you died 10 years ago. When Jen died, you died. We no longer have you as a mom." She continued, "By the time I'm home from work, my husband has the truck loaded with shovels, picks, rubber boots, mosquito repellent, and off we go right from work. There's not time for my children or grandchildren. I know I have to find a balance." When the frozen ground keeps the pair from searching, they put together fundraisers. They've had fundraising barbecues almost every year since Jennifer's disappearance. They've used them to top off their rewards and fund the next summer's efforts. Their efforts haven't always been well received. The Dakota Teepee Reserve has been a frequent spot for the Catcheway searches because they received an anonymous tip that Jennifer had been seen at a party there on June 20th. Another tip came from a woman saying she'd heard screaming from a patch of forest on June 19th. Unfortunately, at one point they were barred from returning to the reserve without a search warrant. There were a couple of reasons for this. A big reason was the negative publicity Dakota Teepee was receiving. As Chief David Pash told News, "Our community is getting a black eye from all this publicity. Now everyone is saying she got murdered in Dakota Teepee, so it makes us all murderers by assumption." Another reason was damage occurring to the reserve. One time, the Catcheways brought in a backhoe that came too close to the Dakota Teepee Cemetery, destroying some of the vegetation. You can definitely see why that would be upsetting. Eventually, Chief Pash did allow the Catcheways to come back to Dakota Teepee, under the proviso that they were always attended by a band counselor. This change of heart was reported to have come about because a woman named Heidi Cook, a band counselor for the Mississippiwistic tribe in Grand Rapids, wrote Pash a letter imploring him to change his mind. But even if their searches made them unpopular, the Catcheways never gave up. The pair, especially Bernice, have become advocates for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, or MMIWG, in Canada. They often speak out about the failures of the government to properly investigate the cases of Indigenous people. They were invited to speak during the MMIWG inquiry in Winnipeg, but there were roadblocks put in their way, such as when the inquiry's lawyers called them and told them not to testify, as they might jeopardize their daughter's case. Which is obvious and complete bullshit, because the Catcheways have always been vocal about what they know with the media. Why did it suddenly matter? When Bernice refused to be silenced, they shortened her time from 2 hours to 20 minutes. Some backpedaling was done, and Bernice's time was restored. But I have no doubt it only further damaged the trust between Indigenous communities and the government. As I said earlier, the RCMP has released no new information on this case. Though they declared the case a homicide at some point, I couldn't even find a press conference about it. Several spokespeople for the police have sworn the case is active and still under investigation, but there's zero evidence of it. At one point, the newest detectives on the case didn't even introduce themselves to the Catcheways, which is both rude and just lazy, because it means that no one re-interviewed them either. The stress of being the driving force in their daughter's investigation has been clearest upon Wilfred Catcheway. He has had 2 heart attacks since his daughter's disappearance, and now suffers from panic attacks. In 2021, Wilfred and Bernice caught COVID. While Wilfred's case was thankfully mild and didn't aggravate his pre-existing heart condition, Bernice wasn't so lucky. She had to be hospitalized. She was in a medically induced coma until she was able to breathe on her own. Bernice has posted since then, so it seems she recovered. But it's another grim reminder of what Jennifer's parents are suffering through. If you know anything about the disappearance and presumed homicide of Jennifer Lee Catcheway, call Canadian Crime Stoppers at 1-800 888-222-8477 or your local police department. Alternatively, if you are uncomfortable contacting the police, you can visit facebook.com/bernice.catcheway. Let's do our best to get the word out and bring Jennifer home. That's all I have so far for the Jennifer Catcheway case. If you enjoyed this episode on YouTube, leave me a like or subscribe if you want to hear more cases. If you're listening on other podcast platforms, please consider leaving me a 5-star review on iTunes. It would help me out a lot. As always, stay safe and stay hydrated.